Welcome to the Health Headliner podcast by Tudu Digital. Our content is informational only and not medical advice. Please consult your provider. Now, let's dive into today's headlines.
Okay, let's unpack this. You hear about forever chemicals, right? These man-made things, they're just everywhere, building up in us, and they're linked to some pretty serious health issues.
Yeah, it sounds like this massive, almost unsolvable problem. They just don't break down.
Exactly. It feels huge. Like, what can you even do about something like that?
It can feel a bit overwhelming, definitely, beyond just waiting for, regulations to catch up.
Right. But what if there was something simple? Something maybe already in your kitchen cabinet?
Yep.
What if eating more fiber could actually help your body kind of nudge these chemicals out? There was this news article making the rounds.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, talking about flushing out cancer-causing chemicals with food. Pretty bold headline.
That's definitely a hook. And it points towards some interesting new science, I bet.
It does.
Yeah.
So for this deep dive, we're digging into that specific research. It's a paper from the journal Environmental Health.
Okay.
And we're also looking at the news coverage that, brought to light. Our mission here is really to get past the technical stuff and figure out what this study actually tells us about these chemicals, PFAS, per and polyfluoroalkyl substances.
And crucially, this idea about fiber, could it really affect the levels in our bodies?
Exactly. We want to understand what matters for you, the listener.
It's this interesting mix of environmental science, human health, and maybe a practical dietary tip.
Let's see. So how did the researchers even look into this? Because it wasn't like a typical study design.
No, it wasn't set up just for PFAS. They were actually quite clever about it. They used stored blood samples.
From another study.
Exactly, from a previous clinical trial that had a totally different goal.
Which was?
That original trial was all about cholesterol, seeing if a specific fiber, oat beta-glucan, could help lower cholesterol levels in adults.
Oh, okay.
And they had these blood serum samples left over, taken before and after the fiber intervention in that study.
So they repurposed old samples. And who are the people in that original study?
It was 72 adult men, all from the Toronto area in Canada.
Okay.
And they were chosen for the first study because they already had high LDL cholesterol, the bad kind.
Right.
And that original study, it was pretty solid. Randomized, double-blind, placebo-controlled, the works.
Good setup. So these men, they were already being monitored for cholesterol, liver function, and some got a fiber supplement. Tell us about that.
Sure. They took these little sachets mixed with water 3 times a day for 4 weeks.
Okay.
Now, about 2/3 of them, 42 men, got the real deal. Oat beta-glucan. Each sachet had 1 gram of beta-glucan, almost 2 grams of total fiber.
And the rest.
The other 30 men got a control supplement. It was basically rice powder, no beta-glucan, barely any fiber, like 0.3 grams per sachet.
So a real fiber group and a very low fiber placebo group.
Exactly.
And they had blood from the start and after those 4 weeks. So for this new PFAS study, researchers tested those samples for how many types?
17 different types of PFAS, and they also went back to the original study's data looking at liver enzymes.
Markers for liver health.
Yeah, things like GGT, AST, ALT, and of course the cholesterol levels too.
Okay, so the plan was, first, just see how much PFAS was in this group anyway.
Right, baseline levels, and second, see if those levels correlated with any of the health markers like liver enzymes or cholesterol.
And then the big question.
Did the fiber, the oat beta-glucan, actually do anything to the PFAS levels compared to the placebo group?
Okay, let's get into the findings. How common were these chemicals in these Canadian men?
Incredibly common. I mean, really widespread. Out of the 17 PFAS they measured, 11 of them were found in over 70% of the guys at the start.
70%.
And get this, 6 specific types were detected in 100% of them.
Wow. 100%. Every single participant.
Every single one. It just shows you how pervasive this exposure is.
That's sobering. We suppose were found in everyone, and which were highest?
The ones in everyone included some of the infamous long-chain ones like PFOA and PFOS, perfluorooctanoic acid, and perfluorooctane sulfonic acid, but also some shorter chain ones like PFBA and PFHXA. And the ones at the highest average levels at the start were PFOSA, that's perfluorokindsulfonamide, and PFOS, measured in nanograms per milliliter.
Okay, nanograms per milliliter. How does that stack up against, say, larger population surveys?
That was another interesting finding. Some of the short-chain PFAS, like the PFBA and PFHXA I mentioned, their levels in this group were found to be 7 to 10 times higher than what a big Canadian national survey had reported not too long ago.
7 to 10 times higher.
Yeah. And they also found other chemicals like Gen X and that PFOSA were pretty common here, but those weren't even measured in that earlier national survey.
So the picture's changing. We're seeing potentially higher levels of some shorter chain ones and new ones popping up.
It certainly looks that way. Exposure patterns seem to be shifting.
Okay, that's exposure.
Yeah.
Now, what about the links to health? Did they find connections between PFAS levels and those liver or cholesterol markers?
They did find some connections with liver enzymes, several PFAS types.
Which ones?
PFBA, PFHXA, the short chain ones, again, plus PFDA and PFOSA, were linked with higher levels of one enzyme, gamma-glutamyltransferase, or GGT.
And higher GGT can mean?
It can sometimes signal liver stress or potential damage. Also, PFHXA and another one, PFHXS, were linked to higher levels of a different liver enzyme, ALT.
So definitely seeing some associations there, even with these shorter chain types.
Yes. Though they did note the average GGT levels were still within the normal range for men.
Okay. What about cholesterol? Since that was the original study's focus.
That was less straightforward than maybe expected.
How so?
Well, based on other research, you might expect links between PFAS and higher total or LDL cholesterol.
Right.
But in this study, only two PFAS types, PFHXA and PFHBA, showed a significant link. And weirdly, it was with higher HDL cholesterol.
Higher good cholesterol.
Yeah, exactly. Not the total or the LDL bad cholesterol, so a bit of a surprise there.
Okay, clear links to liver markers, but a confusing picture on cholesterol in this group.
Yeah.
Let's get to the fiber intervention. Did it work on PFAS?
Right. This is the really novel part. The researchers had this hypothesis, you see,
Based on?
based on the chemistry. PFAS molecules and the bile acids our bodies make share some similarities.
Like what?
Well, they both have parts that like water and parts that don't. They call that amphipathic. They're charged molecules at body pH, and they both circulate in the gut.
Okay. And how does fiber fit in?
Well, we know that certain fibers, especially gel-forming ones like the oat beta-glucan they used,
Yeah.
they're really good at trapping bile acids in the gut. They bind them up.
Right, which stops the body reabsorbing them, helps lower cholesterol.
Exactly. So the researchers thought, hey, if fiber traps bile acids because of these chemical properties.
You could trap PFAS, too.
Precisely. Trap the PFAS in the gut, stop them being reabsorbed into the blood, and maybe increase how much we excrete.
That's actually a really neat idea. Logical. So did it work? What happened after the 4 weeks?
Okay, so they looked at the PFAS levels again, and overall, the total measured PFAS decreased over the 4 weeks.
Great, so the fiber worked.
Well, here's the thing. The total PFAS decreased in both groups.
Oh, in the fiber group and the placebo group.
Yes, both saw a drop in total PFAS.
See, maybe not the fiber then.
Not for the total, necessarily. And they also found that some specific short-chain PFDA, PFBA, PFHXA, PFHPA also decreased significantly in both groups.
Why would that be?
The paper suggests it might be because those shorter chain ones just don't last as long in the body. They have shorter half-lives.
Ah, so they might have just cleared out a bit naturally over the 4 weeks anyway.
Possibly. Or maybe just fluctuations in exposure over that short time. It's hard to say for sure from this.
Okay, so total PFAS down in both, short chains down in both. Was there anything different about the fiber group?
Yes. And this is the really crucial finding, the one that got the attention.
Okay.
They looked at the sum of specific long-chain PFAS, the ones the U.S. National Academies flagged as particularly concerning, PFOA, PFOS, PFHXS, others.
Right, the classic forever chemicals.
Exactly. And some of those chemicals decreased significantly over the 4 weeks, only in the group taking the oat beta-glucan.
Only in the fiber group.
Only in the fiber group. The control group didn't see that significant drop in the sum of those specific long-chain PFRS.
Okay, that's interesting. So the most persistent, well-known ones seem to respond to the fiber.
That's what it looks like from this analysis. The news article specifically mentioned an 8% decrease in PFOA and PFOS levels just in that fiber group.
8% in 4 weeks. That feels potentially meaningful, even if it's early days.
It does.
So let's zoom out. What are the bigger takeaways here?
Well, first, just the stark reality of how common PFAS exposure is. It's not just people near industrial sites. It's widespread.
And includes these newer chemicals, too.
Right, the shorter chain ones, the replacements. We need to be tracking those more. And second, for some people, their levels are high enough to hit those thresholds set by bodies like the National Academies.
Can you remind us what those thresholds mean?
Sure. The U.S. National Academies basically said, if the sum of certain PFAS in your blood is over 2 nanograms per milliliter, doctors should think about screening for related health issues.
Okay.
And if it's over 20 nanograms per milliliter, more detailed clinical checks are recommended.
And this study.
Everyone was over the 2 ng-mellow threshold, and 7% were even over the 20 ng-mellow level.
Wow. So even in a general group, levels can be clinically relevant according to that guidance.
Exactly, it really highlights that. Then there are the links to the liver enzymes.
Yeah, the GGT and ALT associations.
Right. It adds more evidence that these chemicals, even the shorter chain ones, might be having biological effects, potentially impacting organs like the liver.
Okay, and the fiber connection.
That's the potential game changer, isn't it? The finding that oat beta-glucan was linked to a drop in those specific long-chain PFAS, it offers this, glimmer of hope that maybe a simple dietary change could help us reduce our body burden of these incredibly persistent chemicals. The mechanism trapping them like bile acids makes sense chemically.
If it holds up in bigger studies, that would be huge, a practical step people could take.
Absolutely. Especially for those long-chain PFAS that stick around for so long otherwise.
What about that odd cholesterol finding? Higher HDL.
Yeah, the researchers touched on that. They suggested maybe it's just the specific group, smaller sample size than some big population studies.
Oh, yeah.
Or maybe cholesterol changes happen later, kind of downstream from liver effects, and 4 weeks just wasn't long enough to see that play out. Needs more investigation.
Okay. So, a promising lead on fiber, but definitely preliminary.
Yeah.
What were the main limitations the researchers themselves pointed out?
Oh, they were very clear about the limitations. First off, it's a pilot analysis. It piggybacked on a study designed for something else, entirely cholesterol.
Right, not optimized for PFAS.
Exactly. And the duration, just 4 weeks, that's really short when you consider that many of these PFAS last for years in the body.
Yeah, trying to move the needle on something that persistent in only a month is a big ask.
It really is. An 8% drop is notable in that context, but you'd likely need much longer to see the full effect.
Makes sense. What else?
A big one. They had no idea what the participants' ongoing PFAS exposure was during those 4 weeks.
Ah, so people could have still been taking in PFAS from food, water, other sources.
Exactly. And that ongoing exposure could easily have hidden or reduced any effect the fiber was having.
Good point. And the dose of fiber. Was it enough?
That's another question they raised. The dose was 3 grams of oat beta-glucan per day. Some studies looking at cholesterol needed higher doses, maybe double that, to see big effects.
So maybe more fiber is needed for PFAS too.
It's possible. If this mechanism works, maybe a higher dose would be more effective. The news article also flagged the short duration and potential need for higher fiber levels.
Okay, so definitely need to keep those limitations in mind. It's an early signal, not proof.
Absolutely. An intriguing early signal, though.
So wrapping up, we've got widespread exposure to these forever chemicals, including newer types, sometimes at levels that trigger health guidance. We have hints of links to health markers like liver enzymes.
Yes. And crucially, this pilot study gives us the first kind of tantalizing suggestion that increasing dietary fiber, specifically soluble gel-forming fiber like in oats, might be a way to help reduce the levels of the really persistent long-chain PFAS in our bodies.
It's a practical angle, something potentially within our control, unlike avoiding exposure completely, which is so hard.
Right. It shifts the conversation a bit from just prevention, which is vital but difficult, towards potential mitigation strategies for the chemicals already inside us.
It's a reminder that maybe parts of the solution could be simpler than we think, maybe even hiding in the pantry.
Could be. It certainly warrants more research.
So here's a final thought for you, our listener, to chew on. Knowing how widespread these forever chemicals are and how difficult they are to avoid and for our bodies to get rid of, how does this early research suggesting that something as simple as eating more fiber might help lower levels of some of them? How does that change how you think about protecting your health in our modern, chemically complex world?
Does it make you think differently about the power of everyday choices, perhaps?
Maybe so. It suggests even small, accessible actions could potentially make a difference against these persistent challenges.
A fascinating possibility.
Okay, that concludes our deep dive today into PFAS exposure, health links, and this really interesting potential connection to dietary fiber, all based on an environmental health paper and recent news coverage. Thanks for joining us to explore this.
Hope it was insightful, shedding light on a complex issue in this emerging area of research.
And maybe gives you some food for thought about your own diet while we all keep an eye out for more studies confirming or expanding on this fiber PFAS link.
Indeed. More research is definitely needed.
We'll catch you on the next deep dive.
Thanks for tuning in to the Health Headliner podcast by To Do Digital. Like and subscribe for more health news and breakthroughs. Stay healthy and informed. See you next time.